Order, order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. John Lamont.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 1.
Good morning, Mr Speaker, and thank you for that question. The Labour Government has committed £5 billion to the agricultural budget over the next 2 years. It's the biggest budget for sustainable food production and nature recovery in our history. It's good for British farming, it's good for the country, and it should be welcomed by the members opposite.
John.
This week, the President of NFUS, Martin Kennedy, said the new UK Government's first budget hammered hard-working family farms and crofts with crippling tax bills. Mr Speaker, the Minister has accused the Conservatives of scaremongering about Labour's family farm tax. Is the National Farmers Union of Scotland also scaremongering?
I talk regularly to the Scottish National Farmers Union. I respect them fully. But I genuinely say, as I said on many occasions, we need to look closely at the figures, look at the detail, and then we will find the vast majority of farmers in this country will be fine in the future.
Right, let us move to question 2. Do you want to come in on this question? You're actually on the order papers. Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, the Minister's response to my right honourable friend's question just highlights his arrogance on this issue. He constantly keeps saying we need to look at the detail, and yet his department and the Treasury disagree on how many farms will be impacted by as much as 40%. In fact, Mr Speaker, as he knows, the figures repeatedly being regurgitated by the government only consider past claimants of agricultural property relief, not combined with business property relief, which is just as important. And why? Because the Treasury doesn't have the data. We need a comprehensive detail on this policy to properly understand the impacts of his family farm tax. So I ask for a third time in this House, will he release a full impact assessment, yes or no?
We seem to be having this discussion endlessly, don't we? And the figures are absolutely clear. The figures are absolutely clear on agricultural property relief. And the reason I have kept asking for people to look at the detail is because when you look at the detail, what we will find, and listen to the tax experts, listen to the people who have actually looked at it in detail, fewer than 500 will be affected. That is the reassuring message that his side should be conveying to British farmers as well.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Britain's farmers who feed us and care for our environment deserve better than the betrayal they received under the last Conservative government, and better than the attacks in this government's recent budget. 1,400 farmers in Cumbria alone, family farmers, many of them living on less than the minimum wage, will be hit by this tax. But the more immediate threat to farming is the government's decision to rashly cut the basic payment by 76% next year. Mr Speaker, that will hit livestock farmers, upland farmers, dairy farmers and destabilise the whole industry. Will he think again?
Mr Speaker, the changes we have made this year are the biggest boost to sustainable farming that this country has seen, and that is the agricultural transition. The Liberal Democrats have always been flaky on this, never been able to make up their minds what they actually think about it. We're determined to tackle the extreme climate crisis we've got in globally. They seem to think it is not happening.
Rich Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 2.
Mr Speaker, can I begin by wishing His Majesty the King a very happy birthday, a sentiment I'm sure is echoed on all sides of this House. With permission, Mr Speaker, I would like to group questions 2, 7, 10 and 12 together. Mr Speaker, fly tipping has increased after years of Conservative failure, leaving a plague of dumped rubbish across our streets, parks and cities, imposing huge costs on taxpayers and businesses. This new Labour government will end our throwaway society and stop the avalanche of rubbish filling up our streets by increasing recycling rates, reducing waste and cracking down on waste crime.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2022 to 2023, North Warwickshire Borough Council recorded 912 incidents of fly tipping and took 172 investigation actions, yet only one fixed penalty notice was issued. This meant that farmers often picked up the cost of removing the problem and criminal gangs were allowed to get away scot-free. Can the Minister agree with me that more must be done by the Council to prosecute incidents of fly tipping?
can say to my honourable friend and neighbour that local authorities do have the powers to issue fixed penalty notices on the spot fines of up to £1,000. Given the scale of the problem she has outlined, one fixed penalty notice is completely inadequate. And low rates of these notices and prosecutions mean this is a consequence-free crime. We're on a mission to improve that, and I hope her council will work with us to improve its record.
Sarah Coombes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sandwell Litter Watch do a great job of keeping our streets clean, but they and the council cannot overcome the selfish behaviour of fly tippers who are dumping rubbish all over the borough from the Yew Tree to Oldbury. Incidents of fly tipping in Sandwell are now double the national average. So can I ask the Minister to set out further how the government is working with councils to catch and punish these dreadful fly tippers?
Thank you. Can I thank my honourable friend for her remarks? I pay tribute to Sandwell Litter Watch and indeed to Destination Bar Hill in my own constituency, who get out and about every weekend to clean up other people's mess. We will crack down on fly tipping, establishing clean-up squads, and force those who dump the rubbish or vandalise our fields to join in the clean-up. The National Fly Tipping Prevention Group have produced a guide on how local authorities can present robust prosecutions to support tougher sentences. This government will also explore further options with the Ministry of Justice's sentencing review.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid I have to join the litany of terrible statistics about fly tipping in rural areas. There were over 1,500 incidents of rural fly tipping in my constituency of Redditch, with only one fixed penalty notice given to an offender. I wonder if the Minister could give us some more information, as she hopes to work with authorities like mine to ensure these people committing these crimes are brought to justice.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his remarks? I understand his council has just changed political colour, so I do hope that the new Labour administration will take this problem a lot more serious. I'm aware, Mr. Speaker, that waste permit exemptions allow low-risk waste activities to be carried out under a registration scheme, and that this can be abused by criminals. And let's not be under any illusion. There is serious organised crime in this area, and I'm currently considering proposals to tighten the regime, and happy to speak to his council about how we tackle this together.
Speaker. Recently, fly tipping has become a growing concern amongst residents in Stafford, Eccleshall and the villages. Many constituents are increasingly frustrated with the persistent issue of waste and rubbish being dumped illegally. Would the Minister meet with me to discuss how her department is cleaning up the mess left by the last government, and how the measures proposed will directly address fly tipping and improve the situation for my constituents?
I am aware of some very serious incidents in her constituency, including one where significant amounts of rubbish was fly tipped on a driveway near a school, and local pupils suffered very bad health impacts. I am concerned that the carrier, broker and dealer regime, which the last government left, is far too weak and not fit for purpose. I am actively considering how this regime can be reviewed, and I'm happy to meet with her to hear her input into those changes.
James Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nice to see the Honourable Lady back in the House and elevated to a position in government. Well done. The Northern Ireland Environmental Agency have revealed that in the last 2 years it has cleaned up some 306 illegal waste sites, with taxpayers footing the £500,000 bill. That's equivalent to 15 nurses' wages. What discussions has the Minister had with the DAERA Minister back home in Northern Ireland in relation to the cost that comes along with fly tipping in Northern Ireland? Thanks so much.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind remarks? I did meet his colleague from DAERA in an interministerial group in September. We have had a meeting, but I am aware of the concerns of rural areas and fly tipping as well. This blights whole swathes of our countryside. I'm working with the National Farmers Union and others through the National Fly Tipping Prevention Group to promote good practice, including on private land. And according to the National Waste Crime Survey, we know 86% of landowners and farming have been affected by this terrible crime.
Anne Davis.
Mr. Llabarydd, question number 3, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady will know that there are many different facets to food security, but the £5 billion budget settlement for the next 2 years is an important message to food producers as to the stability and continuity we can look forward to in the future. And our work on supply chain fairness will add to that, and we'll be making more announcements over the coming weeks and months.
Thank you. The Chancellor today is hailing the benefits of free trade in a plea to Donald Trump. However, any future trade deal with the US will enable cheap foods such as hormone-treated beef to flood our markets, which would be devastating for the farmers and food security. Will the Secretary of State take the opportunity today to rule out any trade deal which undermines our British farmers?
Mr Speaker, we've always been very clear that we will do nothing in trade deals that will undermine our important standards in this country.
We come to Shadow Minister Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, food security is national security, and underpinning this are farmers and farmland. Labour's ill-judged and heartless family farm tax will put all of that at jeopardy. Family farms lost, tenant farmers not being able to stay farming, communities hollowed out, rural mental health damaged, and precious food-producing land lost to developers or investors. No farms, no food. No farmers, no food. Will the government please now admit they have got this catastrophically wrong, do the right thing, reverse this farm tax, and protect our country's food security?
Well, I welcome the honourable gentleman to his place. And let me say once again that it's very important that we treat this subject carefully, we look at the facts, we listen to people who know about it. I was asked whether someone was wrong earlier. Look at what Paul Johnson has said from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Look at what other tax experts have said. There's many ways in which this can be managed. I would encourage the honourable gentleman to join me in reassuring British farmers about their future.
Dr Alison Gardner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 4, please.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with permission, I'd like to group questions 4 and 14. And I'd just like to say, Ryan, I'm sure this is supported by the whole House, that my sympathies are with the Valencia region communities following the dreadful flooding that we've seen across Spain. This government's Floods Resilience Task Force marks a new approach by national, regional and local governments and flood risk partners to better coordinate flood preparedness. It met on the 12th of September with 40 attendees from 27 organisations, agreeing actions including sharing learning from recent floods. This government will invest £2.4 billion over the next 2 years to improve flood resilience by maintaining, repairing and building flood defences. And yesterday at the Association of Drainage Authorities conference, I announced we would do another £50 million into the Internal Drainage Board Fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I too wish to send my best wishes to the citizens of Valencia and the surrounding region. As the Secretary of State knows very well, the village of Upper Tean is frequently affected by flooding and illegal sewage discharge. After a visit with the Environment Agency, the Parish Council were suggested to set up a flood action group to help tackle the causes and prevent further impacts of flooding. Would the Secretary of State and the Minister responsible for flooding meet with me to discuss the support they can offer the village in setting up the flood action group?
Thank you. And I was delighted to hear that they're proactively setting up a flood action group. I was really keen to hear about that and, of course, the wonderful work that my honourable friend is doing to support them with this. The government fully supports collaboration between risk management authorities, including local Environment Agency teams and local communities. And we're committed to hearing from people on the ground via the new task force. And, of course, I'd be happy to meet them.
Andrew Page.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome my honourable friend's answer. We talk a lot in this House about extreme weather and flooding, but we don't talk enough, at least in this House, about the vital role that our internal drainage boards play in protecting and keeping safe our agricultural land and farming. So I really welcome the government's inclusion of the drainage boards on the task force and welcome the money you put into the system yesterday. A stark contrast as a first action to the first actions of the 2010 Conservative government, which cut flood defences by a horrifying 27%. Will she join me in congratulating the work of my internal drainage board and outline how she'll work with them in future?
Thank you very much. And I was delighted yesterday to speak at their conference and champion the work they do and announce that after listening to them very carefully that we will give them the £50 million over 2 years to enable them to spend it accurately. In answer to the chuntering there, but that's because the first part's already been spent.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents south of Salisbury are concerned about the interaction of flood risk assessment and new house building.
Yeah.
Could she assure the House that the work she's doing is fully integrated with the plans the government have on house building, so that people can be reassured that when land is designated for building new homes, that flood risk is properly taken into account and it is restricted if there aren't mitigations in place?
Very good.
I thank my, can I say, honourable friend for his question. And in response to that, he's absolutely right to raise the importance of ensuring that we have adequate flood protection when we're building new homes. Yesterday we announced a review to the flood funding formula, and one of the things that we're looking at that is looking around nature-based solutions, but also around sustainable urban drainage systems as well. So I hope that offers him some reassurance.
Harriet Boland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the Minister's remarks about flood victims in Spain? Flood victims in Tenbury Wells were concerned to see in the Budget Red Book that capital spending on flood defences is under review. So could the Minister tell the House whether the bid that she will be putting into the spending review for flood defences will be higher or lower than it currently is?
Minister.
I thank, can I say again, my honourable friend for her question. I know we've met about the issue of flooding many times, and just to offer her reassurance, we're going to be investing £2.4 billion over the next 2 years to improve flood resilience by maintaining, repairing and building flood defences.
Portugal.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Can I first of all welcome the new shadow ministers to their places and, of course, the returning one. And with permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to group questions 5 and 16 together. Under the previous government, water companies got away with discharging record levels of sewage into our rivers, lakes and seas, leaving them in an appalling polluted state. That's why we're taking immediate action to place the water companies under special measures, with legislation going through Parliament right now that will ban the payment of unfair bonuses to water company executives. And we've also launched a commission that will lead a root and branch review of the entire sector so that we can clean up our waterways for good.
Well, Portugal.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon, the River Avon as well as tributaries have been heavily polluted by untreated sewage discharges. We know this because of citizen science projects, which sees residents testing for pollutants regularly along the rivers and brooks. Their efforts are supported by community initiatives such as Safe Avon and groups like Stratford Climate Action. Will the government commit to and resource a national environmental monitoring strategy to better understand the overall health of water bodies? And will it commit to requiring water companies to monitor volumes as well as duration of storm overflows?
I thank you for her question, and she's quite right to be concerned about the state of the River Avon. One of the things we want to do is move towards a catchment-based approach to water, so we can look at all of the inputs and be clear that how we can clean them up. The point she's making about monitoring, that will be considered by the Commission led by Sir John Cunliffe. I hope that she and other colleagues will make their submissions to Sir John for his review that is due to conclude in 2025.
Bill Brickle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wholeheartedly welcome the Water Special Measures Bill as a package of reforms to end the systemic dumping of sewage into our rivers, lakes and seas by water companies, whilst huge sums are being paid out by the same firms to shareholders. However, laws are only ever as good as their enforcement, and effective enforcement requires adequate resourcing. Will the Secretary of State consider how the enforcement agencies might be self-funding to a degree, with money raised from fines levied on polluting water firms reinvested into the likes of the Environment Agency?
I'm grateful for his question. He makes a very, very important point, and he will be reassured to know that in the Special Measures Bill that will soon be arriving in this chamber, precisely the point he's raising will be brought into law, so that polluters will pay for further enforcement action, and that way we have a virtuous circle to help clean up our waterways.
Dr. Kieran Mellon.
Number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the honourable gentleman would expect, I have regular meetings with all the key stakeholders, and I speak to the National Farmers Union on a regular basis.
Mullen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My local NFU rep, Gillian Vandermeer, has made clear the concerns of her and many other local farmers about the impact of Labour's family farm tax. I find it extraordinary that the Minister seems to think, even if we accept his figures, that it's okay that hundreds of farms are going to be affected in this way. I appreciate in the Westminster bubble a U-turn can be a difficult thing to do, but I find the public are much more understanding and actually welcome governments realising that they've got this wrong. Does he agree with me that they've got this policy wrong and it's time for a rethink?
Well, what I would say is I've probably had more meetings with Tom Bradshaw over the last few weeks than for a long time for reasons that are entirely obvious. And what I can say, I can be very grateful to him for when he addressed the Egg and Industry event on Monday in Newport in Wales, when he congratulated the government on getting a very good financial settlement for farmers. And I'm grateful to him for recognising that.
Ellie Charles.
Question number 8, please, Mr Speaker.
I'm again grateful for the question, and I would point the Honourable Lady to the extraordinary transformation that is underway at the moment, with the huge amount of extra money going to Sustainable Farming Initiative and our environmental land management schemes this year. It's the biggest transformation on record.
Ellie Charles.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I recognise the very welcome shift towards nature-friendly farming. Nature-friendly farming offers environmental, social and economic benefits, not just nature protection, but also good, healthy food and good jobs. Yet the farmer-led nature-friendly farming network argues that the agriculture budget needs to be more than doubled to £6 billion per year. So will the Minister press his Treasury colleagues to put more money into nature-friendly farming to secure a sustainable future for UK farming?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her support for the transition that we are undertaking. In fact, I was speaking to Martin Lyons from the Nature Friendly Farming Network only yesterday evening, and many of his colleagues are absolutely delighted with the transition we're making. But as ever, the Greens' grasp of economics is limited.
Jonathan Brash.
Question number 9, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. An independent expert panel reviewed the 2021 crustacean die-off event and published its findings last year. The independent panel could not identify a clear single cause for crustacean mortality. Now, the government's keeping the situation under review, and a coastal health programme was recently established to improve coastal monitoring.
Brash.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The die-off on the north-east coast has devastated an industry that has served Hartlepool for generations. Fishermen like Stan Rennie, my constituent, and their families want 3 things. They want support in the face of their livelihoods being decimated. They want a plan to repopulate and rebuild their industry. And thirdly, they want, finally, to get an answer as to how this happened in the first place. Will the Minister meet with me and fishermen from Hartlepool to discuss a way forward on this issue?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he is a passionate defender of his community, and I extend my sympathy to all those who find themselves under pressure when these kind of events happen, and I'd be very happy to meet him to discuss it further.
Bill Lesterson.
Yeah.
Question 11, please.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supporting farmers is an absolute priority for this government, and we've been clear that we will protect farmers from being undercut by low welfare and low standards in trade deals. We are also working to reset our relationship with our European friends to strengthen ties and tackle barriers, helping boost trade to the UK through a UK-EU phyto and phytosanitary and veterinary agreement.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, some farmers benefited under the last government from international trade agreements. Unfortunately, it was mostly Australian and New Zealand farmers, not British farmers, who benefited. So, will my honourable friend confirm this government is going to prioritise British farmers who want to export, not least those who want to export to the European Union through a veterinary agreement with the EU?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and of course he's absolutely right that it was one of the great betrayals of the previous government to the British farming industry. Those trade deals did no credit to our country. But we are going to approach this differently. We are also going to develop a much more constructive relationship with our near neighbours. So the answer to my honourable friend's question is yes.
Gale.
Mr Speaker, there'll be a small point in protecting farmers in international trade agreements. if government policy is undermining those same farmers domestically. So how many thousand farmers is it going to take to clog up Parliament Square next Tuesday before the government realises that its inheritance tax policy is very deeply flawed?
I would once again direct the honourable gentleman back to the figures from the Treasury, which show the numbers affected are under 500. That is the answer to his question.
Libby Linton. Yes.
Question number 13, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, my honourable friend, for a question. The Independent Commission into the water sector was launched on the 23rd of October and will be chaired by Sir John Cunliffe. It's the biggest review of the industry since privatisation. It will report in the summer of next year. It will focus on boosting investability, speeding up the delivery of water infrastructure and cleaning up our waterways.
Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Southern Water are responsible for blighting beaches with raw sewage along Ramsgate, Margate and Broadstairs. Yet they are planning on increasing household bills by 73% over the next 5 years. And the CEOs of Southern Water have received £4 million over the last 5 years in bonuses and salaries. Will the new Independent Commission do something about this egregious situation?
I congratulate her on her campaigning for her local water consumers, and she's quite right to point to the wide failings across the whole system. So we've charged Sir John Cunliffe with leading a commission that will look at how we completely reset this sector, regulation, governance, how the sector operates, so the levels of pollution and failure we saw under the previous government can never be repeated again.
Mr. Speaker, in 2013, the previous government introduced a £50 per household rebate to customers in the far southwest for their water bills. With 3% of the country's population paying to keep a third of our bathing beaches clean on lower than average salaries, will the Minister please reconsider the decision to scrap this rebate for constituents like mine, quietly announced just before the recess?
It's very important that support is targeted at the most vulnerable, so we will be looking at what more can be done through social tariffs to support those families who are risking being unable to pay their water bills in the future, and it's right that we should prioritise the poorest.
We now come to Topicals, Dr Becky Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, question 1, please.
Mr. Speaker, the public are rightly furious, as we've been hearing this morning, about the filthy, polluted states of the rivers, lakes and seas left behind by the previous administration. That's why there's such strong support for the Water Special Measures Bill working its way through Parliament right now. And I would urge all members to give their submissions and encourage their constituents to feed in as well to Sir John Cunliffe's review. This is our chance to conduct a root and branch review of the entire sector to make sure it is fit for the future, properly serving both consumers and the environment for decades to come.
Dr Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Research estimates as many as 170 dolphins and other mammals are caught and killed every year in Sussex, yet no bycatch data is recorded. Could the Minister please outline how he's ensuring super trawlers operating in UK waters are fulfilling their legal duty to report marine mammal bycatch to the Marine Monitoring Organisation? Thank you.
I thank you for her question. Vessels are already, of course, required to report marine mammal bycatch. We're looking at implementing remote electronic monitoring on larger vessels to gather better data about fishing activities. We're also working to improve our marine environment by ratifying the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, enforcing fishing restrictions in marine protected areas and ensuring all catch limits are set sustainably.
Secretary of State Victoria Rackett.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker, and may I wish a very happy birthday to His Majesty the King. The Chancellor, the Secretary of State and the Food Minister claim that their family farm tax will affect only a quarter of farms. Yet after informed questioning by the NFU, the CLA, the TFA and this side of the House, the Minister has now admitted they need to check their figures. Shouldn't the cost of the family farm tax to farming families have been checked before the budget?
HMRC data is crystal clear. 3/4 of farmers will pay nothing as a result of these changes. Family farming will continue into future generations just as it should do.
Victoria Atkins.
You perhaps need to ask his food minister why he said that they're checking the figures at the AIC conference. But I tell him, let me help him out. He can explain the veracity and the accuracy of his figures next week when thousands of farmers are coming to Westminster to rally against the family farm tax, the delinking of payments, the hike in national insurance and other tax hikes on working farms as a result of this budget. Will he come?
It's very important that government listens to farmers, and of course we will listen to farmers, but I know farmers are reasonable people. They will want to look at the facts as well, and they, like everybody else, will see that if they drill into that HMRC data, 3/4 of them will end up paying no more under the new system than they do today.
Tom Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sewage spills are a scourge for my residents, and not just in the sea, but in the street too, with raw sewage and used toilet roll flooding a street in Southwick recently. So can I ask my right honourable friend what the government's plans are to force the water companies to upgrade their infrastructure and bring an end to these foul, smelly spills that are blighting the lights of local residents?
Well, he raises a very important point, and I know, of course, he's a very strong campaigner in his constituency against the failings of the water company and the high levels of pollution we see as a result of the failures of the previous government. I know, therefore, he is backing the Special Measures Bill that is working its way through Parliament now, and I know that he will support Sir John Cunliffe's commission as we seek to reset the sector, changing regulation and governance so it works better for consumers and for the environment.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Speaker, the puffins and other native seabirds in my constituency on the Isle of May were very grateful to see the ban on trawling of sand eels and fishing, but that ban is now under legal challenge. Will the Secretary of State commit to fighting that legal challenge?
The Honourable Lady raises an important question. It's a delicate issue because it's been raised by the European Union, but we are absolutely determined to maintain our position.
Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I place on record my welcome for the record agricultural budget contained in last week's budget? But the simple fact is that that budget is no good staying in the coffers in Whitehall. Last year there was a £300 million underspend in this budget, which is worth more than, on average, £1,400 for every single farm holding in this country. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps he's taking to guarantee that every single penny of that budget gets to communities like Lichfield, Burntwood and the villages?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right. Isn't it extraordinary that after all this sound and fury from the opposition, they didn't even spend the money that was available? This government is going to make sure that every penny that we have gets to farmers because we're on the side of British farmers rather than whipping them up in the kind of irresponsible way that the party opposite have been doing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Family farms across West Dorset fear closure as a result of the government's planned changes to APR and BPR, and I would urge the ministers to rethink the policy. However, the budget also includes the announcement of a UK carbon border adjustment mechanism to be introduced from the 1st of January 2027, which will place a carbon price on goods that are imported to the UK, including fertiliser. A carbon tax on fertiliser will only increase the cost of production for farmers struggling to compete with cheap imports and drive up the cost to consumers. So will the ministers please tell the House what assessment has been made?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The carbon border adjustment mechanism was a proposal supported by the previous government, and we have confirmed that. It is complicated in the way it will work. It will not be affecting people before 27-28. But once again, the Liberal Democrats show again that when it comes to environmental issues, they absolutely can't be trusted.
Michael Payne.
Mr. Speaker, residents in Woodborough Village have faced the devastation of flooding far too many times in recent years. Will my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, therefore work with me, Woodborough Flood Action Group and Woodborough Parish Council to bring forward a much-needed flood alleviation scheme for Woodborough Village?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Protecting communities from flooding is, of course, a top priority, and that's why we've launched the Flood Resilience Task Force and investing £2.4 billion over this year and next to improve flood resilience. We've also announced another £50 million investment into the internal drainage boards, and I commend him for his work with local flood action groups. And, of course, I'm keen to hear how this progresses along this Parliament.
Speaker, last year the River Lamont suffered 266 sewage spills from storm overflows, putting irreversible harm to a rare chalk stream. Will the relevant minister meet with me to urgently discuss plans on how we can address this in Newbury?
Hear, hear.
We can certainly ensure that the relevant minister meets with the honourable gentleman. I hope he'll also feed in his views to Sir John Cunliffe's review, because he will be looking at models of catchment-wide approaches that will do a lot to better protect chalk streams in the future.
Blocker.
Thank you. I ask my right honourable friends for an update on progress in creating 3 new national forests. And as it's my birthday, can I extend an invitation? Can I extend an invitation to visit Macclesfield Forest in my constituency?
Can I wish my honourable friend a very happy birthday, and can I join with him in celebrating the anniversary, the 75-year anniversary of the national parks? The last that pioneering Labour government created groundbreaking laws so every citizen could have access to nature's beauty. We will protect that access, and we will set up 3 new national forests, and who knows where one of them will be.
Mr. Speaker, in our increasingly volatile world, I'm sure the Secretary of State will agree that food security is of growing importance to our national resilience. So I hope he can commit the new government to continue publishing annual food security index, with the next update coming at next year's Farm to Fork Summit.
It's a pleasure, of course, to take a question from the distinguished former Prime Minister. We are reviewing the data that we can publish. We want to be as open and transparent as possible. I think that's good for the sector. It's good for scrutiny, but we will announce in due course precisely how that will operate.
Perkins.
I thank my honourable friend from Hull West for coming back to me with regard to the River Hipper scheme in my constituency, which is of huge importance. Can I invite her to come to Chesterfield to meet people affected by the floods and see the Hollymoorside scheme that could make a real difference?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's always a pleasure to work with my honourable friend, and I know how passionately and well he campaigned for his community during the floods last time and how deeply it moved him. So, of course, I'd be more than happy to continue to work with him.
Chair of the Select Committee, Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Secretary of State and indeed the Chancellor of the Exchequer on the achievement of the budget. In 23 years in this House, I have never seen such a degree of unity amongst farming organisations in their response to it. One point on which there seems to be no disagreement is that the removal of the ring fence around agricultural payments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland is a bad move. Nobody asked for it. Why did they do it, and what do they expect to achieve with it?
He will be aware, of course, that we have announced the biggest budget for sustainable farming, £5 billion over the next 2 years in the history of our country, and that is to be welcomed by everybody in the sector and who cares about the sector. This is a government that believes in devolution. We believe that devolved administrations should have the right to take decisions about their own countries. So the consequentials mean that the appropriate level of funding will continue to those devolved administrations. Our support for devolution means that it will be the devolved administrations that take their own decisions about the best way to spend it.
Mr. Speaker, Chester Zoo, in my honourable friend, the member for Chester North and Neston's constituency, does important nationally leading conservation work. But zoos nationwide have been facing regulatory uncertainty for nearly 3 years now due to the previous government's delays on publishing new zoo standards. Could my honourable friend set out when his department plans to publish the updated version of the standards for modern zoo practice to drive improvements in animal welfare and provide certainty to these institutions?
Can I thank my honourable friend for that question? I have visited Chester Zoo and seen the wonderful work that they are doing in species conservation. I will endeavour to write to him to update him on those regulations.
So, Jeremy Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has justified its IHT changes for farmers on the basis it's concerned about people gaining short-term tax advantage by buying agricultural land. Can I therefore ask whether the government considered an approach, rather than the sweeping changes it made, which would limit the IHT exemption to those who could demonstrate the family farm had been in family ownership for a certain number of years? If that approach was explored, why wasn't it pursued? And if it wasn't explored, why not?
Mr. Speaker, we've had a lot of debate around this issue, and I'm perfectly happy to have discussions with honourable members about the tax regime in general. But can I just finish by pointing out that one of the beneficial aspects of this policy may be to get the generational shift that farming so much needs in this country. There are many parts to this policy. It is a complicated policy, and in future we will have further discussions.
Antonio Bance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 2nd and 3rd of November, a massive burst water main in my constituency left 8,000 homes without water for over 12 hours. The response of the water company, South Staffs Water, was slow, ineffective and secretive. Will the Minister remind South Staffs Water and all water companies of their responsibilities to help residents and work with local stakeholders following the incidents?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say what a tireless champion she's been campaigning on this issue. And she's quite right to feel offended by the level of poor communication she's had from the water company. And I do hope they hear the message loud and clear from this House that water companies need to work with and communicate more effectively with the members of Parliament in the areas they represent.
Well, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, John McTernan, an advisor to Tony Blair, publicly stated that farming should be treated in the same way as Margaret Thatcher treated the miners, and that it was an industry the country could do without. As a farmer, I find this incorrect, offensive and deluded. Does the Minister agree?
Yes.
Right, we now come to the next questions. Let the front bench change over.